Thank you. It is really good to be here today. Finally, and it's been a journey in putting it all together, but I've been excited and looking forward to this since Lee first asked me. It's right in the very beginning, right when this first began 3-4 weeks ago, I guess, to do this. And I asked her then, what would we talk about? And because there was so much we didn't know, and we said, well, but in 3 weeks we'll know everything. And so here we are, and we still don't know everything, do we? But we're going to do the best we can with this. So one of the things that I want to point out is that I did send out some questions in advance. The Institute sent them out for me. I had some questions, and they're on the screen now, about what opportunities for change you see, about what are the most significant challenges you face, and about what kinds of questions are coming up for you. So if you didn't get those questions before, you still have an opportunity to respond to those questions or any other questions that come up for you as we're talking. And Lee's going to be monitoring that for me, so she'll be helping out with monitoring the questions. But one thing I have to tell you is it's been like a party in my office for the last several days, because it was so great to hear from so many of you in response to those questions. I was a bit overwhelmed, in fact, with the response to the questions. It was great fun. I say to all old friends and new friends who responded to them, I've really been enjoying going through them and working with them. I'm going to do the best I can in answering some of them. I have to say that some of the questions that came up have to do with, for example, when are we going back to work? Do not know the answer to that one. I'm not in charge of that. When can I personally go back to work is another one that people are asking about their own practices. Again, that's up to Anthony Fauci. It's not my domain. There's some things that even Dr. Fauci can't answer at this point. But what I'd like to be able to do is create some discussion and some perspective, share some perspective. And those of you who know me know that you'll hear more questions than you will answers, but I hope they're questions that'll be helpful to you. I hope they're questions that will help you continue to work through this process that you've been doing, working through this process. So we call this program Reboot, your post-COVID better than ever practice. Those of you who don't know me may think that I called it Reboot because that's just my language and I'm just that kind of a tacky person, techie. I'm not. It's the real reason is that in fact reboot happens to be the only technical term I know when it comes to computers, and then so it is actually the only solution that I have whenever anything goes wrong with a computer. If somebody says the computer's not working very well, I say, well, did you try to reboot? So rebooting never made sense to me because in my mind it doesn't make sense that a mechanical object would work and then not work. And then if you turn it off, it works again. How does that really make any sense? So it's not my area of expertise, but I do have to also say that there is a way that reboot is this sort of magical thing that happens, right? There is some magic in it that when you turn off a computer and turn it back on again, voila, there is magic. And I hope that that's part of what I'm hearing from many of you is what is coming out of this interruption that we've all experienced, this disruption of our lives that nobody asked for, nobody anticipated, but that we've all been going through. And so I see in that, just as the spring tulips are evidence of the beyond the snowstorm, especially for those of you in the Midwest, I understand, who are still getting snow. There will be opportunities that come out of this process. And I have to say that it probably shouldn't surprise me and wouldn't surprise many of you on this call from this community that you did see opportunities. That when I asked that question about what opportunities you saw lots of opportunities. You saw opportunities to demonstrate who you are, to really show people what is unique about your practice, about your way of coming to your work, and show up in ways that distinguish you from other practices. We also talked about the opportunity of renewed appreciation. The idea that for yourselves, many of you said, being away from work was an opportunity to recognize how important your work is to you, to refresh and renew your appreciation of the work you get to do, the good work you get to do, the people you get to work with, your team members and your patients. And my guess is it will also be a sense of renewed appreciation for your patients and your team member, for their experiences in your practice. Many of you said it was an opportunity to incorporate new learning, and you're excited about that. We'll talk some more about your excitement about that maybe a little bit later in this conversation. But while this has been going on, you have learned, you have been studying, you have been on webinars, you have been reading technical knowledge, clinical perspectives, new procedures, new technology, new systems. You've been looking at systems, new leadership in some cases, new communication. And so you're anxious to get back in and apply, as Dr. Pankey said, apply your knowledge now to the next phase of your practice life. The other thing that many of you mentioned is that you're really interested in a whole health perspective with your patients, and that sometimes, I know, dentistry isn't seen that way. We're not always seen as, we're seen as sometimes as being about fixers of teeth as opposed to promoters of health. And you see opportunity in that for you now, that there are certain things, we are certainly going to become more involved in some aspects of whole health. We're, taking temperatures and having different kinds of conversations with people, maybe even doing some testing. We don't know yet, but it certainly will open the conversation to bigger picture perspectives about risk factors and perspectives about things like inflammation, the kinds of things that we've been talking about, but now there will be a new context for that in the face of what everyone who comes through your door will have been through in the process. You see it as an opportunity to refine systems. Many of you acknowledge that your systems will have to be different, and there's some question about that, and we'll talk about that a bit, but that you also see that it's a way of using your systems and refining them in such a way that they serve you better. One of the things about systems is they get created at one point and then things change, and very often those systems don't change with things that change. So there's an opportunity now to really refine your systems in a different way. The other thing that many of you talked about, again, which is interesting, that many of the things that were challenges are also opportunities. Things that are opportunities are also challenges. And so systems was an example of one, and slowing down was another one that many of you identified as an opportunity. It's a concern that you have around your practices, a concern about how you will be able to be as productive as you need to be, because you will have to slow down, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to have different kinds of conversations, to organize yourselves in different ways. And that slowing down process, many of you have said that you've had to slow down your personal life, and you want to be able to take that back with you when you go back to your practice. You don't want to forget about that. Many of you also said that you see opportunities to enhance profitability. You have some concerns about that in some way, as I said, but you also see opportunities for that. When your practice has an opportunity to stand out in a different way, when you do slow down and you're able to have conversations with patients that are more comprehensive in nature, they're looking at bigger pictures, being able to go back and talk about how it was for people in this period when they did not have regular access to a dental practice. What kinds of things happened to some of your patients, and stories that some of your patients have shared with you about what it was like for them, and maybe a greater appreciation and a greater commitment to taking care of things before they become a problem. I often told my patients in hygiene about a story that was true for me I had some old amalgams that dentists had said to me, you know, at some point you ought to replace those with crowns. And I said, yes, at some point I will do that. And some point came on a day when I had a moving van sitting outside my house, packing my family up to move for a year to Okinawa, Japan. That was not the best time for me to be sitting in a dental chair having a crown done. And I shared that story as a way of helping people see the opportunity they have to make choices in a different way. And many of you acknowledge that you see that as an opportunity. Many of you also talked about this as an opportunity to really collaborate with your team, to engage your team more in the process of making decisions. And that really struck me. The idea of a reboot really struck me in that regard. Some of you have been in practice for a long time and your teams join you at different times in your practice life. This is a reboot. And so this is really an opportunity for everybody on the team to get involved in a ground up kind of conversation about what's next in the practice, about where you're going together next and how you will go about doing that. And certainly embracing technology has been a big part of this process for all of us. There were certainly those who have been very comfortable with podcasts and Zoom meetings and all sorts of communication that is different from face-to-face or the telephone. And there were many of us who are way more comfortable than we ever thought we would be and are still working on becoming more and more comfortable. But there's no question that it will become more of our future. There is no question. Now that this has begun, we will not go back to the old ways of being. We will be using this technology. And there's a tremendous opportunity in that in your practices. Some of you have talked about some teledentistry that's happening, some consultations that are happening over the phone, being able to have people take pictures. There's just so much, so many ways that practices that have not done anything in the past have been using this technology. And now is a great opportunity to really embrace that technology. Now, you also acknowledged that our those, and as I said, some of those opportunities are also challenges. There's no question that we have some work to do, going forward, and that it's not going to be, as we keep hearing over and over again, it's not going to be we just flip a switch and move on to the new normal. This is going to be a process. This is going to be a process of moving through various challenges. And that's what really I'd like to focus on for the rest of our time today. There were in particular 4 key areas when I read the hundreds, literally hundreds of emails that I received regarding the questions that we sent out. There were 4 sort of overarching categories that came up for me that I thought we would spend some time on in this 1 hour that we have today. It's not a lot of time, but it's enough time to look at some specific areas. And one of them is connection. One of the questions that came up and the challenge that you're going to face is how will we connect? And I want to talk about connection from the perspective of connecting with yourself and your own values. As Dr. Pankey would say, know yourself. Connecting with your team members, connecting with your patients, connecting with your new knowledge and your new learning. You also said that one of the challenges that you talked about was about collaboration. You want to engage. Many of you said we want to have more engagement with our team. We want them involved in this process, but we're not quite sure how to do that. And so I think that would be a valuable thing for us to spend some time talking about. You also want to talk about safety. That's a primary consideration for all of you in the responses that I got from the questions. You want to be able to create a safe environment for your patients, for yourself, and for your team. And it's important for us to talk about, we don't have all the answers for what that looks like, but we do have some ideas about what that can look like and where that might go. And finally, of course, is communication. That really is the focus of my work. As a recovering dental hygienist, my work with practices over the last 20 plus, 30 plus years now, since I stopped doing clinical dentistry, has been on patient care and communication. And that's the key. That, in my opinion, will be the key determinant to how successfully and how quickly you are able to begin to move forward with your patients, but not without the foundation of the other three. So those 4 areas will be really the sort of outline for our conversation. I think that one of the things that many of you have become aware of as a result of this process we've been going through is that there has been a sense of loss. We talked about this a little bit. Greg talked about this in the webinar he did in one of the beginning webinars in this series, about recognizing that we have been and are experiencing a loss in our lives. And if you're like me, you've gone through some of variation of responses to that loss. Everything from closing my ears and in denial, to being very studious and checking things out, to being angry and frustrated, and to having no clue about what to do next or where to go with it. It's a process that my guess is all of you have gone through on some level, and we are all still going through it. And all of your patients are going through a similar process, and all of your team members are going through a similar process. I'm delighted to know that we have a number of team members that are on this phone call. Some practices listening all together, social distancing, of course, but all together, virtually participating in this webinar. I'm delighted to hear that, because what is true about this process we've been going through is we've been going through it together. We've all been going through this culturally. This is a major shift in our culture, but we're not all going through it the same way. We're going through it together, but we're all going through it differently. And on any given day, we may be at any one or more of those stages, and dozens more stages of the process that each of us incorporate into whatever is happening in our lives. So as we work through this process of loss, to get to a place of letting go of what was before. And even when I hear people talk about going back, going to the new normal, you know, there will be a time when things are more predictable. There will be a time when things are more routine. There will be a time when we have more clarity about what we're doing and what's happening next and all of those things. But things are never going to go back to the way they were before. We have experienced a loss. As a culture, we've experienced a loss of confidence, of safety, a belief system that that our healthcare system was going to take care of us, that we were going to be able to continue to practice. There was some predictability that's now not there for us. And that's going to be present for a while in our culture. And the more you understand that, the more you can articulate that, the more you can experience that and recognize that while we're all going through it, we're all experiencing it differently, the better able you will be to have conversations with your patients, with your team, and with everybody. And from my perspective, the foundation for all of that is our personal values. The ability to use this time to get in touch with your personal values. What's important to you? What's the foundation for you that has gotten you through things in the past? All of us have had bumps in the road in our lives, some bigger bumps and some smaller bumps. All of us have had to experience losses. And we all have a set of core values that allow us to work through that process. And the more we're in touch with those values, The more we know about what those values are, the higher our level of awareness about our own values is. Mac McDonald talked beautifully about this in his webinar. The more in touch we are with those values, the better able we will be to make decisions based on those values. We're going to make decisions based on a lot of things, and right now we have input coming from 100 different directions, right? We have the accountants are advising us, the consultants are advising us, the supply people are advising us, the medical people are advising us. Everyone has advice. And the bottom line is, as leaders, as owners of dental practices, as dentists, as leaders, as team members, as leaders in your families, as leaders in your practices, you will have to make decisions based on your values. Whatever information comes in, your ability to filter them through your values is what will truly distinguish your practice going forward. Your ability to be in touch with those values is what will make that the biggest difference in that regard. And there are, you know, you can do an intellectual exercise. There are lots of exercises on values that you can gain access to, lists of values that you can go through and identify some and then prioritize them. And there's some really useful exercises that challenge you to think about what really is a value. I have to say, for me, values have to do very simply with what's important to you, what matters. What is most dear to your heart? They're not just a list of things you like or a list of ways you want to be. They're more about a way that you have to be, a way that is meaningful to you. That when you're living in that place, you're living in a place where you feel strong. Dr. Karl Hammerschlag, psychiatrist Karl Hammerschlag, likes to ask the question, and this is a great exercise question for yourself and everyone in the practice. He asks the question, how does your work remind you of what you like best about yourself? How does your work remind you of what you like best about yourself? Because your work should remind you of what you like best about yourself. And this time when you're away from your work is really a good time to look at that question and ask yourself, and ask others on your team, ask of each other, what are you missing right now? Sure, we're getting to spend more time at home. We're getting to spend more time with our families. Some of us are doing things we hadn't done before. We're reading. I even cooked a meal recently. It was remarkable in my household. We're doing things that are wonderful for us, but this is also a time to step back and to say, what are the parts of going to work every day? What are the parts of doing what we do that we're missing right now? Because all those questions are all evidence of your values. Those are windows into which you can begin to identify more and more what's important to you in regard to your values. Another way to look at values is through stories. And this, again, is we'll talk a little bit more about how you're connecting with your team, but this is a wonderful team exercise, is to ask everyone in the practice to share a story about an interaction they had with a patient, for example, in the practice, an interaction that they had that was particularly meaningful for them, that touched them in some way. And then to have a conversation, to hear all of those stories, and to listen to the different ways in which people appreciate their work, the different ways in which we're making a difference through our work. And then after everyone has shared their story, to just ask everyone to take a moment and just make some notes, write down, what values did you hear expressed in that story? What values were you hearing as people told their stories? Did you hear values of creativity, of connection, of collaboration, of you don't have to give labels to them, but just describe what are the values that you hear expressed. And then ask yourselves, as you go back into working on every other thing we're going to talk about for the rest of this hour, the question to go back to every time is, in this, making this decision about what's next, how is that a reflection of the values that we've identified? And maybe what new values are we identifying as we are in this process of making decisions? What are the values on which we want to be able to stand firmly and say, that's what this is based upon? There's a way in which, when you have that foundation, everything gets easier. I don't like to think of values as a rigid box that we're in, that force us to do things, or that narrows our perspective, but rather a very expansive container that we can grow in, that we can begin more and more to see. And I believe that one of the things that will come out of this process, that a year from now, when you look back on it, you will come to understand that some values became clearer to you as a result of this time that you took away. In fact, I'd like to suggest another exercise for you to make a note of. And that is to ask yourself in this process to make note of 1 or 2 or 3 things that are happening for you now, that you're experiencing now, that you have an awareness of now, that you want to bring forward into your practice. And I'd like to suggest that you write them down and that you put it someplace. You put those in, whether it's in your computer or in a shoebox, you put them someplace. And then periodically, you make a decision that throughout the year, periodically, you will pull out those things that you wanted to incorporate, and ask yourself how you're doing. A way of tracking your progress, a way of staying connected with your values once you get back in the busyness again. What will it take? Just think about how you could come back to those values and what you could learn. You will have choices to make. You will have lots of choices to make over the coming weeks and months. And to the degree those choices are grounded in your values, will give you the courage to make those choices, and it will also give you the language to communicate those choices. So I'm sort of curious. I know I've been sort of going on like a freight train. I want to check in with Lee on what she's been hearing from people and what has been coming up for you, Lee, as you've been hearing me go on about values.
Great, Mary. Yeah, and most, you definitely hit a chord, because people were posting in there sort of what they've been feeling, loss, nervousness, fearful. And and my experience of it is I've felt all of those things, right? In any given moment since this whole thing started, depending on the moment you ask me, what am I feeling? It could be the whole bell curve, right? From being very optimistic to being very pessimistic, and it's interesting for me, a term that's come up for me a lot since this started, I learned from Rich Green, it's ambiguity tolerance. Right? And for years and years, I can hear Rich in my head telling me to practice expanding my ambiguity tolerance. And there's been a lot of times in the last couple of weeks I've been thankful for that, right? For his prompts to do that, right? And because we are living with a great deal of uncertainty, same thing. I was, on 2 different Zoom calls yesterday where people said, what do you think patients are going to think when we can open our offices? Are they going to come back or not? Are things going to stay the same or different? And honestly, the answer to all those questions is yes and yes.
Mhm.
Right? Some patients will be more fearful and stay away longer, and other people are desperate right now to call and get their teeth cleaned. I mean, so it is going to be the both end of everything that we can imagine. But what I know for myself is, in the moments when I've been most scared, fearful, anxious, um, the piece that I go to always is I come back to me and I say, what do I know I can count on? Right. And that might be my language for kind of my values. What do I know I can count on? I know I can count on my intentions about how I interact with my patients and with other people. I know I can count on myself. Right. At the end of the day, I know there are things I can count on me for. I also know there are things I can't count on me for that I'm not super good at, right? Like, we were laughing about being techie, but, and those are the foundational pieces that always serve you really well when you have to come through something like this. I know I've probably shared with you before, but one of my all-time favorite quotes is a Mark Twain quote. And not exactly, but my version is, I am a very old man and I've lived through many trials and tribulations in my life, most of which never actually happened. Right? And that, in my worst moments, I say that quote to myself because it's a reminder, is that when I think of what's the best case scenario and what's the worst case scenario, neither of those are highly likely. Right? that the world will somehow end up someplace in the middle of those two things. And that gives me comfort to think about that, right? That, it's wherever my mind goes when I'm catastrophizing, that's not statistically highly likely, right? So that, in combination with just being able to get grounded in, as you said, my values, and that I know I can trust myself, that's comforting for me.
Excellent. And that will be the foundation for everything. One of the questions that I saw pop up while you were speaking, Lee, was, do people really know what their values are? And I always remember a friend of mine who said, years ago, I did some work with a consultant on values. And he said, and he was asking me a question about our son, Jason, at that time, who was a teenager. And he said, well, we should discover we should help him discover what his values are. I said, I know what his values are. His values are money. That's all he cared about, is money. He was 16, and so it's his value is money. And my friend said, well, I don't believe that's his chief value. And I said, why not? And he said, because if it was, he'd have some. And so a value not acted upon is not a value, right? So the values really are, we don't have to go off to the mountaintop to discover our values. If we look at what we do and how we do what we do, we can hear our own values. One of the things that the exercise that I pointed out earlier about what values you heard, any team meeting you have, you can end any team meeting you have by taking the last 5 or 10 minutes and saying to everybody, okay, can we take a minute, please? And everybody write down, what values did you hear expressed in this conversation we just had? That will give you information about what your values are, because they're what's working you, what you're working with. The other way I phrase that sometimes is, if somebody from Mars landed their spaceship in the middle of your team meeting, or in the middle of your day seeing patients, and they didn't know anything about dentistry or anything else, they just wanted to know what your values are. They just want to know what's important to you. What might they identify based on yesterday afternoon, what happened, or what might happen, or what might have happened this morning? What would they guess were your values? And it's really easy to see how we're acting and how our values show up in that regard.
Absolutely. And there were several comments in there about people love the suggestion of doing that. And so Trish posted, she's curious what you think about doing a Zoom meeting and bringing team members together and doing that exercise of sharing a story and then asking everyone to listen to values. And how, I guess the question really is, do you think that would be a worthwhile exercise using Zoom or technology, since we're not all in our offices right now?
Trish is always one step ahead of me. Yes, Yes, and yes. I think that's an excellent idea. I'm going to talk a little bit more as we go on about meetings and that sort of thing. And Lee, I'm going to make one request of you, because interestingly, I just realized as we are talking about technology that one high-tech piece that I do not have available to me right now is a clock.
Got it.
So
I'll keep you on track, but you have 24 minutes in case you want to know where you are.
I'm at 24 minutes, or I have 24 minutes?
You have 24 more minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, because my computers are now not showing a clock, so what do we do without them, right? So Trish is bringing us very nicely into the next conversation, and that is about collaboration. That's one of the challenges. You want to have more collaboration, and particularly collaboration with your team. Now, what we have experienced in the past as collaboration is not what we're experiencing right now in terms of collaboration, right? And so many of us have become way more comfortable with these platforms such as Zoom. Even me is becoming more popular, more comfortable with this technology. So when it comes to collaboration and meeting with your team, again, each of you is different. Every person listening to this, every practice is different. So what I want you to hear is wherever you are is exactly where you're supposed to be, and start there. So if you haven't had any connection with your team since you stopped practicing, then do something. Get on the phone and call people, send them an email, a group text, find some way to reach out to everybody on your team. Find a way to stay connected and build from there. If you've had some phone conversations, you've done some interactions with people, and you haven't yet done a Zoom meeting, ask yourself what your team would be most comfortable doing. Maybe maybe just a conference call on the phone would make it easier for people to participate. Here's the thing about collaboration. Collaborate on figuring out how to collaborate. Okay, ask people, what would they like to do? I think if you're not doing anything yet, send out an email or a text saying, I'd like to connect with everybody. I'm wondering how you're all doing. What do you all think would be the best way for us to connect? And get feedback from people and give people an opportunity to come up with ideas for how to do that. When we were meeting with one of the Pankey Hygiene Study Club, somebody said, well, let's have, text messages or whatever. And then somebody said, no, we should do WhatsApp. And I said, well, WhatsApp, what's that? Somebody set it up for us. And, I don't have to figure out how to do WhatsApp to be a part of that. Somebody else can figure it out for me. And this is an opportunity to give people the chance to try on those skills, to take some leadership in some of those kinds of things. If you haven't had conversations yet, I wouldn't begin with that conversation about values. I would begin with, how are you doing? I would begin with listening to everyone's experience, an opportunity to just share how you're experiencing this disruption in our lives. How is it going for people at home? How are their children? How are their spouses, their parents? What are the things that they're paying attention to now? What are the things that they're enjoying about being at home? What are the things that they're that are worrying them? What are the things that are frustrating them? What are the things that they're missing about coming to work? At first the answer to that question might be, oh, I'm missing Lori's pound cake, or Susie's bean dip, or whatever, or I'm missing the jokes, just the bad jokes that Alan tells. Whatever it is, that's okay. That's the starting place. But look for opportunities to really listen to each other, to really try to understand this other person's experience with this cultural shutdown that we're all going through right now. And be willing to share your experiences. Share your experiences about what's comfortable for you and not so comfortable. What's fun. It's okay to have some fun. It's okay to be enjoying being home with your kids. All that stuff is fine. Give the opportunity for that to come out. And then at the end of that meeting, ask when they'd like to do it again, or if they'd like to do it again, or how they'd like to do it again, what they'd like to talk about the next time around. But the most important thing is to use the connection, the collaboration time to first listen. I have to say, when I saw all the enthusiasm about all the learning the dentists have been doing, the systems they're going to refine and the new technology that they're going to create, I put myself in the position of one of the hygienists in one of those practices thinking, oh my God, what is going to happen next? And that dentist coming in and saying, here are my 27 new ideas and systems that we're going to put in place as we go back to work. Take the time to listen. If you have ideas, whatever ideas you have, share them as a first draft. Here's the first draft of an idea that I've been thinking about. What are your thoughts about this idea? Keep in mind that for everyone, when there's something new, it's human nature is we will each go to our own concern about that. How is it going to be affect me in my role in the practice? Don't try to run over that. Invite that into the conversation. Sometimes our enthusiasm can get in the way of our ability to really collaborate with other people. Getting input doesn't mean, just because I say, oh my God, I don't know how to do that on the computer, doesn't mean I'm never going to do it. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It just says I'm worried about it. And if you can say to me, I understand why you would be worried about that. I know that's not exactly, has not been your strong suit in the past. What do you think it would take for you to get comfortable with that? What do you need? What can we do to make that easier for you if we decided to implement that? Collaboration is about conversation. It's about dialogue. And the more people who are involved in it, the more likely it is that there's true collaboration going on. So whatever way you're meeting, whether it's Zoom meetings, phone conferences, whatever it is, whatever you're doing, if you're doing all the talking, stop. Just stop. Do more listening than talking. Begin by hearing where people are. Begin by saying, what are some of the things that, I think everybody is at home. Everyone, I will tell you this, everyone on your team has ideas. They're all thinking about stuff. They may not be thinking about it as much as you are, but they are thinking about it. They have concerns. They have ideas. They've probably come up with 27 creative ideas of their own. So find ways to tap into that creative energy. It is out there if you give it a chance. It is out there. And that brings me to the next concern that was really primary pretty much across the board. And that is about safety. That is one of the things that I know team members are concerned about, and I know doctors are concerned about, and we know patients will be concerned about. What we don't know is to what degree they will be concerned about that. So we can make a bunch of assumptions about what people want to know about safety. I will share with you and many of you on this call will remember during the 80s when the AIDS crisis first became known to us, and the epidemic of AIDS that was going around, and the changes that began to be made then about wearing gloves and masks. I also know there are a lot of you on this call who cannot imagine that there would have ever been a time when anyone would have put their hands in a patient's mouth without wearing gloves. And yet, for those of us in that process, it seemed like a big deal. It really seemed like a big deal at the time. I remember saying, wear a mask. Oh no, how could I relate to my patients if I'm wearing a mask? That'll never work. We all know it worked. We implemented change. Gradually, that it was awkward at first, and gradually that change just became a part of how we operate. We don't know right now what all the changes are, but we do know there will be changes. And again, each of you will decide for yourselves. There will be regulations about changes. That's what we don't know right now. We don't know what the regulations are. But you as a leader of your practice have a responsibility to, again, filter whatever information you get through your own values. If it were me, I'd like to be ahead of the curve. I'd like to be able to say to my patients, we implemented these changes before it was mandated. I'd like to be able to say to my patients, in this practice, we have always put safety first. We have always first focused on the safety of those of us who work in our practice, our own health and our own safety, and the health and safety of our patients. And we're doing everything we can to make certain that you are as safe as you can possibly be. And I would ask them what their concerns are. Again, the temptation here is to wow people with all of our knowledge and all of our statistics and all of our studies and all of those things. But if you can listen to what their concerns are first. I remember when we made those changes in sterilization in the 80s, it became the routine recommendations from pretty much every consultant out there was that we should take people on a tour of our practice, showing them our sterilization area and going into excruciating detail about all of the things we were doing for sterilization. I saw a lot of eyes glazed over in those days, a lot of bored patients being given a speech that really wasn't relevant for them. Find out where people are. The funny thing is, if you ask people their concerns, some of the things they will ask will be things you could never have thought of, and they may be very simple things that you're already doing. There's much we don't know about this disease, and we will be discovering more and more as the weeks go by. That's going to continue to be part of the process. What I would want to hear if I were a patient, what I would want to hear is that you'll let me, if I were a team member, that you'll let me know as you know it, that you will be completely open and honest and transparent about the process. You'll provide any information that you have. And the other thing I would say to you is, one of the things we do have some education about is we know how to look at studies. We know something about research. We know something about studies. We don't have to be experts on it to share our expertise. We do have knowledge about that. When patients come to you and say, well, I heard this is true. Oh, wow, that's interesting. How, where did that information come from? And then give the patient an opportunity to talk about that. I'm not familiar with that source. I don't know anything about that source, but I'd be happy to look into it for you if you'd like me to. Or I don't know about that source. Here are the sources I tend to go to. Some of your patients would love to have a website where they can go to the CDC, the authentic information that people can at least get out of the gossip, the awfulizing, the assumptions about this disease, the rumors that are spreading. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges for you in your practice, is to listen to people's concerns without getting drawn into the drama of it, to be understanding and compassionate and share what you know, and be willing to explore what you don't know, and be willing to invite others to explore what they don't know, and to let them know that as you know, you will give them more information. We don't know we don't know if we're going to have availability of things. You will have to make decisions about what you can do and when you can do it, based on what's available to you. That's going to be part of your responsibility as practitioners. You will have to be able to say, what can I do with what I have available to me? And the way I'd like to ask you to think about that is, if you can think about it as being on a timeline, try not, I think sometimes when we think about, and we keep hearing this from the task force, it's this idea of it's not going to be flipping a switch. What if you thought about a year from now, you'll be in a new groove, you'll be moving along and things will be smoother. You'll have a good sense of where things were and where things are now. You'll have systems in place. You'll be up to speed in your practice. You'll be practicing normally. And then if you say, what has to happen between now and then? And depending on what's available to you, what you can afford, there are questions. Safety questions aren't just about health, by the way. Safety questions also have to do with finances. Team members will have concerns about that. Dentists have concerns about that. We're all concerned about the interruption in our ability to make a living. Certainly your patients will be experiencing that. So the willingness and ability to be open and transparent about that, to be able to express and your own vulnerability around that, to have enough confidence that you'll work through things and you are working through things, but that it's a learning curve for you. And that if I say one thing this week and I say something different next week, it's not because I'm not being authentic. It's because things have changed. I've got new information. And everyone knows we've already experienced that culturally. That's already part of the conversation, that things change. And we get new information. And when we know better, we do better, as Maya Angelou say. When you know better, you do better. That's part of that safety conversation. I'm guessing, by the way, Lee, that we might have some input on some of these. Are there particular questions or thoughts that you think we should address?
Yeah, actually lots of great conversations going on in the chat. It's one of the things I love about when we do these webinars is people are supporting each other and answering lots of questions. One of the ones that I thought was maybe pertinent was what outlets do dentists have to sort through their feelings? Listening and reaching out to their patients and their team members is essential, so we're supporting them. The question I ask is, did they have the capacity to lead these heart conversations? Meaning, did team always have the ability to support the dentist? And if not, where does the dentist go to get that kind of support?
Boy, that's a really good question and an important question, I think. And I think that I have two things that I would say about that. One is that when it does come to conversations with team, I think that there is an opportunity for vulnerability. Now, you all know your teams. So you know how much you can share and how much you can't share with your teams. But I would ask you not to make the assumption that they're expecting you to take care of everything. To not make the assumption that they're not willing to enter into this conversation with you and help you make decisions about what makes sense, because I think in many cases they are. But the other thing I would say in regards to, for the dentists in particular, is I've been involved in facilitating virtual study clubs. And to me, you don't have to get on an airplane to go someplace. You can get 5 or 6 or 7 people together on a Zoom call and have authentic conversations that really advance your understanding, your knowledge, your perspective, that bring new information in, that are very intentional in their process. That we're not gonna get into the awfulizing and the gossiping. We'll come with some sort of structure, maybe everybody brings 3 good ideas. I've been involved in some amazing conversations and people bringing in what they're hearing from different experts or consultants that they're working with and having conversations about that. There's a tremendous opportunity, I think, for dentists to be supported by their peers in ways that were not always as easy in the past, where you had to get on an airplane and go someplace. So setting those things up now, this is the time to set those things up when you can't get together, and that with the idea that they can continue when we are still able to get together. Maybe on the other times we'll get together at a restaurant or we'll get together at somebody's office, but some of those can still happen virtually as well.
Yeah. So yeah. And Mary, also, I don't know that something's going on with your audio. Don't know that we need to fuss with it right now, 3 minutes to the hour, but you sound like you just talked through a helium balloon. But, one of the things I was going to say to that is, I have a group chat with some of my close friends in dentistry, and we've been using it a lot in the last 4 weeks. Every once in a while, somebody will just post something because they're just stressed or they need to vent and everybody else will come on, or we do hear something. You know, if you've been to the Institute recently, you know, those WhatsApp groups are on fire right now, and it's a great way to connect. And if you got off of it and you want to get back in with your E1 or E2 or whatever class it was, just email Alex and she'll reconnect you to your WhatsApp group. Yeah, and that's, you know, one of the things that's one of the things that's a gift of being in a community. You know, community is fun in the good times. Community is essential when we do need to have that human connection, people who can listen and can understand. So, all right, Mary, I'm giving you the 2-minute warning.
So the last two pieces I think are really connected, and that is connection and communication. Communication, listen first, talk, do. Listen, talk, do. Listen, talk, do. Over and over and over again. You all know I'm a broken record when it comes to listening. There will never be a time in your practice when using your listening skills will be more important or more difficult than it is right now. I know how much you want to get going. I know how much you want to ramp up your practice and get things moving again. This is the time to slow down. This is the time. There are things that will force you to slow down, but you can make that commitment going into this. It will distinguish you going forward. It will be hard. It will be one of the greatest challenges you've ever faced, but it is also going to be one of the greatest gifts you can give to your patients and yourself right now, is that willingness to listen. Yes, you can give information. Yes, you can reassure. There will be a time for that, but start with listening. Start with understanding, and you'll go on from there. There's tremendous opportunity in this. And one of the things I want to say is, if there were questions that you emailed me about that we didn't get to address, and you want to email me again specifically with some specific feedback, I'm happy to give that to you, or anybody who's on this call. If you have questions that we didn't get addressed and you want to email me to mary@maryosborne.com, I'm really happy to get back to you and do whatever I can in terms of helping you get through this, because it's an opportunity for all of us right now to give. And one of the things that I hope you know is, we're going to get through this. You will be back at the Pankey Institute before you know it. You will be in Key Biscayne.